Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi Shir.
Shalom Aleichem and welcome back to today's Daf Yomi, which is Kesubos Daf Nun. We are holding at the third line from the top of the Amud. And we are actually in the midst of a sugya, a Gemara which provides a list of many takonos which were established by the Sanhedrin when they were holding court in the town of Usha. We had 1, 2 yesterday. Today the Gemara will add another 3 takanas. Amar Rabbi Law. So the first takana was actually Rabbi Law, in the name of Rish Lakish, in the name of Rabbi Yehuda Bar Chanina. The second takana yesterday was actually one name less. It was only Rabbi Law in the name of Rish Lakish. Here comes a third takana in the name of simply Rabbi Law. Amar Bilah Be'usha Hiskinu, in the town of Usha. The Sanhedrin, the Chachamim, were masakin as follows. Hamabazbeis, when one distributes his funds for tzedakah, al yebazbeis yosher mechemish, he should not give away more than a fifth, 20% of his assets. Tosfos brings in the name of the Yerushalmi, initially you may give away 20% of your existing assets, and then subsequently, on a yearly basis, it's going to be 20% of your profits going forward. So the minimum is maaser, of course, 10%, but there is a maximum as well. No more than a chomesh. Tanya nami hachi. We find the same in a brayso. Hamevazbeis, when one distributes his funds to tzedakah, al yevazbeis yosim mechomesh, not more than a fifth. Why? What's wrong? Why can't I just give as much as I want? Shema yitzarech lebrius, because he might give away too much, in which case he'll have nothing, and will become dependent on the community for handouts. In fact, there was a story. There was an individual who indeed wished to give more than a fifth, and his colleague did not allow him. Who was his colleague? Umanoi. His name was Rabbi Yeshevav. There was a different version of the story. Rabbi Yeshevav, he was the one who wanted to distribute too much tzedakah. And his colleague did not allow him. Umanai, who was his colleague? Rabbi Akiva. Amar of Nachman, v'itei mesam seir of Achabar Yaakov. Ma'ikra, where do we find this concept in a pasuk? Yaakov Avinu tells Hashem, v'choil asher titen li, everything that you provide for me, a'aser, a'asrenu lach. I will give you ma'aser, 10%. A'aser is 10%. And then he adds the word a'asrenu, an additional 10%, for a total of 20%. So the concept of 20% is sourced in a pasuk. The Maharam Shif points out, so although the idea is sourced in a pasuk, we still need takanas usha. What's the purpose of takanas usha if it's already recorded in the Torah? So he says the point was, the pasuk tells us about 20%. What about more than 20%? Perhaps you can. No, you cannot. And that was takanas usha, to present 20% as the maximum amount allowable. So he said aser, 10%, asrenu, an additional 10% for 20% total. V'haloi dami, isura basra. Well, it doesn't really work out to 20%. Because you see, you start with 100. Take off 10%, you're down to 90. 10% of 90 is merely 9. So it's a total of 19. 10 that you took off plus 9. You're not going to have 20% if it's a tenth and then a tenth from the remainder. Well, it's unequal. Isura basra, the second tenth, which in this case is really only 9, li isura kama, compared to the first 10%, which is really 10. So it's not really a total of 20 if it's done this way, compounded. Omar of Ashi, asrenu lebasra, kikama. Yaakov Avinu used the word asrenu instead of just saying aser, asrenu. The second 10% is exactly equal to the first 10%. Asrenu lebasra, I will give away the second 10%. Kikama, just as the first one. They're both of equal value So it's 10 plus 10 for a total of 20%. Amar Rav Simir bar Ashi, Ushmui Salulu. If we pay close attention to the halachis of Usha, the 3 halachis that we had, 2 yesterday and 1 more today, you'll realize, you'll notice that the names associated with those halachis are diminishing as we go along. As we mentioned before, the first halacha was a quote of Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rish Lakish, in the name of Rabbi Yehuda, or some say Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina. 3 names involved. The next halacha, which was Kasru, this fellow who writes, gives away his nachasim, there we cut out a name. It was Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rish Lakish. Today's halacha was merely Rabbi Yehuda, quoting the Takanas Usha. V'simanich, in order to remember which one's what, to remember the sequence, which one's first with the most names, followed by the second one with less names, followed by the third with barely any names, listen to the following formula. Ketanim, that was the first halacha, regarding feeding and supporting children. Kasvu is the second halacha, writing away your assets. Ubiz bezu, that's the third halacha, distributing funds. So it actually has a sort of a ring to it. Ketanim kasvu bizbezu, the youngsters rode away and gave everything away. Amar Yitzchak. Here comes another halacha from Usha. Be'usha hiskidu. They were masakin in the Sanhedrin in Usha. Shehi adam mizgalgel in b'noi ad 12 shana. Although one is meant to try to have his children get involved in Torah learning earlier in life, but take it easy, back off. Mizgalgel. Rashi says, if you see he's having a difficult time getting into learning, be soft and gentle with him. Until when? Until he turns 12. Mikan ve'elach, past that point, push him, pressure him. His time has come. Yered imoy lechayev. You may even interfere with his life, Rashi says. Strike him and withhold sustenance. You have to actually pressure him to get him on track. Eini. Is that the case, that you wait that long until 12 years old? Rav instructed Rav Shmuel bar Shilas, who was a Malame Tinoikis, he was a Rebbe, the renowned Rav Shmuel bar Shilas, who established the networks of yeshivas, the first one to establish the concept of yeshivas. Until then, the father used to teach his son, but upon realizing not everybody had that opportunity, he established the concept of yeshivas, where a Rebbe would teach children. So he was the master, educator, and Rav gave him instructions. Batzir Bashis, a child who's below 6 years old, that's too young to push him. Loy to Kabul, don't even accept him into the yeshiva. Bashis, once he turns 6, Kabul, do accept him, do admit him. V'safi leketura, and feed him like an ox, like a mature adult ox who just eats away. At a young tender age of 6? Haven't we spoken about 12 years old just a minute ago? Says the Gemara, yes, that's correct, that's true. There are different levels of feeding and teaching. Safi leketura, once he turns 6, load him up, feed him, but don't pressure him. Miu, but still, the concept of applying pressure, for that you have to wait until he turns 12. And Taisus points out, based on a Mishnah in Perkei Avos, that there were actually 3 levels. The Mishnah says, Ben Chamesh Lemikra. When he turns 5, start teaching him Chamesh. Well, that's just in a soft manner. Teach him a bit, but don't force it upon him. Once he turns 6, then we have the next level, Safi Le Ketura. Load him up. But to actually pressure him, for that you have to wait until he turns a quasi-adult, which is 12 years old, and he's up to that. Another teretz can be, we had a kasha, is it 12, is it 6? Like kasha, the answer is, it depends regarding what subject we're speaking. Halem mikra, when it comes to chumash, that's at an early age. Halem mishnah, in terms of mishnayos, for that you have a little bit more patience. Damar Abaya, as Abaya tells us, really aim. Abaya actually was an orphan from father and mother, so aim is a reference to his caretaker mother. And she would tell me like this: Bar shis lemikra. Once he turns 6, that's perfect time for teaching him loads of chumash. Bar eser lemishnah. When it comes to mishnayos, you're going to wait a bit more until he turns 10. Bar tleisa letanisa meis leis. Once he's 13, and Tosfos learns, it means that he's within the 13th year, so he's 12 and a bit, not yet bar mitzvah. Letanisa meis leis, you start introducing him to a full day fasting when required. Ubetinoikis bastresar, regarding a girl when she enters the 12th year. So clearly, when it comes to mishnayos, you need to wait a bit. You need to have a bit of patience until he develops his maturity and is able to tolerate and to appreciate advanced topics. Interesting point that Rashi points out. We always wonder why a girl has her bas mitzvah a year before the boy. So Rashi seems to offer a solution to that quandary. He says, an isha is mamaheres. It's around halfway down the Amud. Ubetinoikes. Ubetinoikes, says Rashi. Shehi mamaheres lahavi koyach. She develops quicker than the boy. She'ena mateshas koyach b'liban Torah, because she's not involved in Torah learning, which sort of weakens a person's guf, strengthens and reinforces the neshama. But the guf sort of lags behind. He's weakened by intense Torah learning, which the boys are involved in. Therefore, they have to wait longer for their body to fully develop and mature, whereas a girl had that advantage. She's a year ahead. Interesting Rashi. Okay, Amar Abaye. Amar li my care mother told me, Hai bar shis. She gave me some medical advice. This 6-year-old, the Tarkale Akrava, who was struck by a scorpion b'yoyma de mishlam shis, on the day that he turns 6, that's a very dangerous juncture. Lo yichaye, the child will not live, Rashi learns, unless you administer emergency aid. Maya Susei, what's the most effective remedy? Mirarta de daya. You feed him the gall of the daya bird, chivrasa, a white daya bird, b'shichra, mixed with beer. Nishvaye, we rub it together, v'nishgaye, and we give it to him to drink. Tosfos learns, well, after he's bitten, after the fact, it's over. When the Gemara asks about remedy, it means in advance, in order to immunize and vaccinate the child. You apply this formula and that saves him. Furthermore, Haibar Shata, you have a 1-year-old, the Tarakle Zibura, who was struck by some say Zibura as a bee. B'yayma de Mishlam Shata, on the day of his birthday, Lo Yichaye, he will not live. Maya Susei, what's the remedy? Atzvasa de Dikla, this material that grows around the base of the palm tree, but Maya mixed with water, the Shvaya, rub it together, and Shkaya, give it to him to drink. Amar Katina, Kalamachnes es Bnoy, Pachos ben Sheish. If a father insists on getting his boy an early start, brings him into the cheder below 6 years old, he's not yet ready for it. Rotz Achrav is going to go chasing after him. He's going to have to put a lot of effort in trying to maintain his health due to his weakened state of health, due to this overburdening in the yeshiva. He's not up to it yet. Don't overburden him. Rotz Achrav ve'elim hagir. He's going to try to catch up to him. Rashi says lahavroisa lachiyosei, to fix him up physically, and he's not going to be successful. A child's going to be totally weakened from this traumatic experience of being taken to the yeshiva prematurely. There was another version. It's actually a positive twist. Chaverov, this boy who got a head start, his friends are going to be lagging behind intellectually. Rotzan achra ve'ein magi noisei, they're going to be chasing after him and not being able to catch up with him intellectually because of his advanced Torah knowledge, because he got that head start. V'tarvayu isnu, and the truth is that both positive and negative elements are present in this child. On the one hand, chalish, he's weakened relative to his friends, v'gomer, but he's very learned. Another pshat would be, it depends on the situation. Should a father introduce his child at a young age or not? Well, it depends how healthy, how strong the kid is. Hadakachish, if he's a rather weak child, and take your time. Hadabari, but if you see that he has that strength, he's able to handle it, then why not? And actually, it benefits him. He's going to be way ahead of the game in terms of his learning. Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina, another halacha from Usha. Be'usha Yiskinu, when the Sanhedrin was stationed in Usha, they introduced the following halacha. If an Isha decides to sell her properties, a property which she inherited from her father, which now really belongs to her, but the husband has the pay raise, right? And actually, upon her passing, he will get that property. So she sells it off in his lifetime, despite the fact that he has a sort of a lien on this property. Umeis, and then she passes away. The husband has first rights, first claim, first lien on this property, and he can go and take it back from the buyer. He encountered L'Rabavo, the Avakoi, who was standing amongst the crowd in the town of Usha. Amar Lei, he asked Rabbevo, Man Mora de Shmata de Usha, who's the one who presents all these halachas from Usha? Amar Lei, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Chanina, he's the source of all these halachas. So he was so excited to hear the name attached to the halachas, which is a very vital component in learning Torah. We all know the Mishnah in Perkei Avos tells us that Torah is meant to be associated with its source, the one who created the Torah, the one who initiated, the one who presented this halacha. It relates to him and identifies with him. He sort of gets credit for it. It's his part of Torah. Maybe Gula meant to always reference the actual source. So once he heard the name, he was all excited. He heard it from him 40 times, over and over, until he was clear with his name, and it appeared to him as though it's sitting in his pocket, in his money bag, meaning he internalized this detail. There's a pasuk in Tehillim Perek Kuf Vav, which reads as follows: Ashrei Shemrei Mishpat, lucky are those who safeguard justness, one who performs charity all the time. Well, how's that possible? You run out of money sooner or later. How is it possible to perform tzedakah at every given moment? The answer is, when the Sanhedrin, when the yeshiva was in Yavne, they presented as follows. Some say it was actually Rabbi Lezer. Tzedakah all the time is Zehazon Bonav Abnoisav Kshen Tanim, feeding your sons and daughters when they're young. That is a real tzedakah. Charity begins at home. That's a tzedakah b'chol eis. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani Omar. Another example is Zehamagadol Yosayim v'Yosayim b'Seich Beisei, one who raises an orphan boy and a girl in his home, Masian, and come time for marriage, he marries them off to each other or to others. That is a tzedakah b'chol eis, raising Yosayim. That's a constant chesed. Here's another pasuk in Tehillim. You can maintain your wealth. You don't have to lose your wealth, but you're still doing tzedakah all the time. Isn't that an oxymoron? Rav Huna, Rav Chizda, they explained as follows. Chadamar, one explained, how do you provide and give and still maintain? If one learns Torah and then gives it over to others, you actually don't lose anything. The Marsha indeed points out you actually gain. As the Gemara tells us, Mar Makos, Umi Talmida Yosim Kulam. A Rebbe gains from his Talmidim, from interacting with his students, more than anything else. So giving is really gaining. V'chad Amar, the other one explained, an example of holding on to your wealth, but still giving it to others. Za'akosev Teira Nevim Uksuvim Mashil L'Acherim, one who writes the Tanakh for himself, and then allows others to use it. So he has it, but he's still sharing it with others. The pasuk says, when you go to merit to see grandchildren, it creates peace. What's the connection? Once one merits to see his children giving birth to their children, it brings about peace. You avoid the whole chalitza issue and yibum issue, which creates conflict and machlekes. He wants, she doesn't, etc., etc. When we have children, then there's no point of chalitza. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani Amar, Kivan shebanim lebanecha, shalom al dayani Yisrael. When people have their children, the dayanim, the judges, are sort of uninvolved in allocating the inheritance, which avoids conflict and machlekes. Because when one has children, it's pretty clear where the nechasim go to his children. Otherwise, he has to begin allocating, and then the fun begins. So in the Mishnah we learn that there are two takanos inherent in a ksuba. Takana is ksubas benin dichron, which means that the isha wants that her nedunya, the items that she brings into the marriage, should eventually be transferred to her set of children. Let's say she has her own set of children and he has his own. She prefers that her kids get it. This way it stays in the family. This was enacted in the ksuba. It's called ksubas benin dichron. The zecharim boys, the boys will accept, will collect, will receive her ksuba upon their death, meaning if she dies and the husband takes over and then he dies, so instead of the family splitting everything, her Yerusha, her ksuba materials are directed to her children. That was one takana. Another takana is that he obligates himself, a man obligates himself that upon his passing, his daughters will be supported, will be fed using his assets. Yosef, Rav Yosef, Kameder Rav Hamnuna. Rav Yosef was sitting in front of Rav Hamnuna, Yosef, Rav Hamnuna v'Kamar, and he was listening to Rav Hamnuna speaking as follows: Kashem she'en habonim yorshin elo min ha'karka. Just as we know that it's an established halacha that when it comes to the boys being yorish, the ksuba of their mother, it only applies when there is karka. That's the halacha, as we're going to see later on Daf Tzaddik Aleph. Kach, likewise, we parallel that to the other takana in the ksuba, which is the mezainis for daughters. Eina bonis nizainis elamana karka. They only get what they need if there is karka, because fact is, a proper shibud, a lien, is only really effective when there's karka. That's the way it goes. You have real estate, and you can apply a lien. Real estate is not going away. It's not running away. It's not going anywhere. That guarantees your claim. So typically, a shibud, a claim, is applicable to karka only. And therefore, Rav Hamnuna says, look, just as by the ksubas benin dichron, it's only when there's karka, the mezonis for bonis, only when there's karka. Now, it wasn't clear. He didn't explain that the Yerusha of Bonim referenced here is specific to this new takana of the ksuba of their mother. So avash alei kuli alma, everybody was in an uproar. What's going on? They thought that Rav Hamnuna simply was speaking about a regular Yerusha, that boys are only Yerush when there's karka. What do you mean? The shavik ara, a fellow who passes away, leaving behind karka. Who? Only in that case, the Yarse Lebnei, will his children get that karka as Yerusha? The Lo Shavik Ara, but a fellow who leaves no karka behind, there's no Yerusha? What do you mean? Lo Yarse Lebnei, his sons will not be Yerushim? What do you mean? Yerusha is synonymous with karka. Amar le Rav Yosef. So Rav Yosef explained, he sort of elaborated to Rav Hamnuna, V'dilma, I have an idea, probably, Ksubas benin dichron ka'amar mar. Probably, Rav Hamnuna, you was referring to a very specific type of Yerusha. The Ksubas benin dichron, and that needs karka, not a regular Yerusha. Amarle, so Rav Hamnuna was satisfied and impressed. Mar, referring to Rav Yosef, you, the Gavar Rabbu, who was a great man, Yoda my kamina, indeed, you fully understood what I had in mind. And you calm down the audience. Omar Rabbi Chia bar Yosef. Here's a story. Rav, right? The Amoira Rav, Zon, he provided for girls after their father's passing, mechiti d'aliyah, using wheat which was sitting in the aliyah. Now there are two ways to learn what happened. Iboilu. So the following question was asked. What was Rav doing? You see, there is mezainis, regular sustenance, and there is something called parnasa, providing for their wedding needs, which is also something that they can take from the assets. Rav was zon, right? He provided. From what? From the grain sitting in the aliyah. Iboilo, parnasa havya. Was this their wedding provisions? Umay aliyah. And when he said the word aliyah, he meant me'eluya de'av. It's a lashon of appraisal based on the understanding, the way Bezdin, appreciates the father as to what he had in mind, based on his standard of living, what he would have given to his daughter had he been alive. Shmuel, this is fully consistent with Shmuel, Damar Shmuel, the Parnasa, when it comes to this type of Parnasa, Shaman Ba'av, we estimate their father's mindset. Oidilma, that's one way to look at it. Oidilma, maybe Mizeni Mamish. This was simple, basic sustenance. Hava. Umay Aliyah. When it says he gave them from the grain of Aliyah, what does that mean? Midvarim Tovim. A reference to the good words, the new takana shenemru ba'aliyah, which was said in the upper floors, meaning there was some sort of new takana introduced by the chachamim while they were sitting in an aliyah in an upper floor. The Amar Vitzel Bar Yosef ba'aliyah iskiru, up in the aliyah they were misakin, that although strictly halachically speaking, a girl will not get her mazonos unless there is karka, as explained before. But the Chachamim changed that. They decided, let's provide for them regardless. Hiskinu sheyu banis nezonis min metaltlin, that the banis can take their mazonos even from metaltlin, from mobile items. It doesn't have to be karka. So that's the question. What did Rav have in mind? Was it parnasa? And that certainly you collect even from metaltlin, or was it more of a controversial type of psak halacha, even mezainos, based on the new takana? So although originally it was only karka related, but it was changed into metaltlin. Tashma, here comes the right. That even metaltlin can be used for this purpose. Biyadei, in the hands, in the possession of who? The Rabbi Benoi, that was his name, Achva, the brother, the Rabbi Chia bar Abba. Hava metaltlin de Yasmi. He had in his possession metaltlin of Yisayim. Also, look at the Shmuel. So they came to Shmuel because the daughters needed parnasa. Amar lei. So Shmuel instructed Rabbi Benoi, who had this metaltlin, Zoin, provide for their needs. Now, my love, should we not assume, since he used the word Zoin, which is typically associated with mezainos, right? He was a dayan and he was giving a psak halacha. He should have been very careful in how he was expressing the psak halacha. The fact that he used the word zoin, explains Tosfos, indicates indeed that it was mezainis. My love, the mezaini. Bar Yosef. This was mezainis, and he instructed them to use metaltlin in accordance with Rav Yitzchak Bar Yosef. Severely, that was his opinion. That what? That in accordance with the new takana, we use metaltlin for mezainis. And therefore, perhaps, it's probable to assume that Rav as well would follow this halach. Says the Gemara, no, perhaps not. Hasam le parnasa avoy. Maybe, in fact, it was parnasa, it was not mezainis. Ushmuel tamei, and Shmuel will follow his shita. Dama Shmuel le parnasa shaman ba'av. Shaman ba'av. When it comes to parnasa, it's all about what we perceive the father would have wanted to do in terms of his daughter's wedding provisions, in which case the assumption is that he would have used his metaltlin as well, and therefore we can access those items as well. But when it comes to mezainis, perhaps we have to stick to the ikar takana, only karka. Hava uvda b'Naharda, there was a story that took place in Naharda. V'dun daini de Naharda, and the dayanim of Naharda instructed them to feed the daughters using metaltlin. There was another story in Pumpadisa. V'agbi Rav Chana bar Brizna. Rav Chana bar Brizna allowed the daughters to collect mezainis from metaltlin, but Rav Nachman was very unhappy. Amar Rav Nachman. So Rav Nachman tells them, Zilu ahadru, go give back the money. Maybe he was telling the dayanim or the daughters. But otherwise, magbina l'chula padnaicha b'naicha. I'm going to take away your padnaicha, your palace. I'm going to take away your homes. Hurry up, give back the money. Rav Ami Rav Asi. So Rav Ami Rav Asi suffer lemezan metaltlin. They figured they're going to provide mezainis using metaltlin. Amul Rav Yaakov Bar Idis. He told him, how can you do that? Milsa. This is a halacha. The Rabbi Yechon and Rish Lakish. Both Rabbi Yechon and Rish Lakish refused to carry out this halacha. Atun avdin ba'uvda. You're going to carry it out. Halacha l'maisa. Don't do that. Rabbi Lazar, Savar, he figured, Lemezlim Metatlan, to provide mezainis from Metatlan, Amar Lafanav, Rabbi Shimon ben Eliakim. So he turned to Rabbi Lazar and he told him like this, Rabbi, I know with certainty that your direction is as follows. Your motive is not based on strict halacha. You're not following the strict halacha. You know that it's not really meant to be done api halacha. Ela midas rachmanas. You're just implementing compassion. And the Marshal says that he wasn't really compelling them to support their sisters using metalton, but it was just the fine right thing to do. He was, convincing them this was the right thing to do. So I know this was your attitude. It's not halacha l'maisa. You're doing, you're advising them to go the extra mile. But you have to be careful. You know why? Because it can be misunderstood what you're doing. Elo shema yira talmidim. Maybe the talmidim are watching what you're doing. They're going to see v'yikbu halacha l'deres, and they'll establish this as an accepted fact l'deres for all generations. You have to be careful with what you do and how you do it. Hahuda asal kamed Rav Yosef. A fellow arrived to Rav Yosef. Amar lahu. So Rav Yosef tells them, Havalo, give the girl mezainis mitamri dal budya, using the date sitting on the mat below the tree, meaning there's something which is totally detached from the ground, so she can access even metaltalin. Amar le Abai tells him, what do you mean? Ilu bal chayv hava. Even if this person was a real bal chayv, a creditor, who can actually extract properties that were sold after the loan was issued, right? Would Rebbe provide for him in this manner? Meaning, would the Baal Chayv have access to Metatlan? Of course not. So why would you give it to the girl? A shibud is meant to be applied to karka. Amar Leis, he said 100%. I didn't mean something detached. When I spoke about dates on the mat, I meant the chazia. It's fitting. It's suitable lebudya for the mats. Kamina. That's what I meant. Meaning, it's about to fall off the tree. It's about to land on the mats. You can give that to the girl, because that's connected, that's karka, safe. But ultimately, once it's about to shed off the tree, is something which is about to be chopped off, kigaz is dumb in halacha, we treat it as though it's been detached. It's called metaltalin. Answer is that tzricha ladikla kamina, we're speaking about something which still needs to grow on the tree. That's what I meant to say, and that has a din of karka. The bottom line is we had several takanas of usha, staka a maximum of 20%. This way you don't have to become a burden on the tzibur, don't overdo it. We had about not overdoing in terms of teaching children. We spoke about the isha who sells her nechasim, her husband go and take it away from the lakuach after misa. We spoke about feeding your children, that's the highest form of tzedakah, sharing your wealth with others, whether spiritual or otherwise, and still not losing a bit. We spoke about parnasa, meaning wedding provisions. That comes even from a tatlan regarding mezainis, although initially the takana was only from karka, but it seems like several Amoraim, etc., held otherwise, and based on a takana, new takana, which was taught to us by Rav Yosef, the takana of the aliyah, that a bas can even draw her support using metalton. All the best to you and hatzlacha Rabbah.